On today's episode, I'll go through Blackhawks individual and team stats through the first 10 games.
You're Locked On Blackhawks, your daily podcast on the Chicago Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Jack Bushman. Real quick, got to let you all know that today's episode is sponsored by FanDuel. If you're not already a member, go and visit FanDuel.com to get $150 worth of bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins with America's #1 sportsbook. All right, good afternoon, everyone. Again, thank you all for joining me on another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, your one-stop shop for all things Chicago Blackhawks. Before I get into segment one on today's show, of course, some of you have probably noticed that I have gone back to the microphone stand here today for the first time in quite a while, and that's because I noticed someone, I forget who, down in the comment section on yesterday's episode said, let's get a GoFundMe started to get Jack a microphone stand. And I actually do have one. Some of you might remember that I used it probably 4 to 5 months ago now. Anyways, the reason that I ditched it and went with the microphone in hand style is because when I moved, I got a new desk and it's kind of a weird L shape. And this is the closest the microphone can be to my face with the microphone stand because of the shape of my desk. So I'm rolling it back out here today, just giving it a try, but please let me know in the comment section if it sounds better with the microphone stand, if it sounds worse, if you prefer the microphone in hand style. Please let me know, because at the end of the day, all I want to do is what's best and what my viewers and listeners enjoy the most. So please reach out in the comment section, hit that subscribe button for me as well. Really closing in on 2,000 subscribers, but won't be able to reach that goal without all of your help. But to open things up on today's episode, as I mentioned right off the top, going to be taking a look at Blackhawks team statistics and some individual player statistics as well through the first 10 games of the year. I'll give 1 to 2 quick sentences based on those statistics, and then I'll have some greater takeaways in the second segment of today's show, where I'll talk about the biggest standouts and disappointments through the opening 10 games of the year. And this is an idea that I actually really enjoy, and am going to be breaking up the Blackhawks season in 8 parts. So every 10 to 11 games, I'll be going over team and individual player statistics and talking about the biggest standouts and disappointments. To kick things off, though, we're starting with number 98, Connor Bedard. Through the first 10 games, despite there being some criticism thrown his way early on, he is still the Blackhawks' leading scorer at 19 years of age. 3 goals and 6 assists for 9 points. However, he doesn't have a power play goal yet, which I think is a little disappointing, and he is only shooting 8.8%. A frustrating start a little bit for Bedard, but he is still finding ways to produce. And what those last two stats tell me, the no power play goals and the 8.8 shooting percentage, is that there's still a lot of untapped upside, because Bedard, for the most part, is getting quality scoring chances still on a nightly basis. Next, we have Seth Jones, who through 10 games has 1 goal and 6 assists for 7 points, 1 power play goal, which I like to see him producing on the power play early. 26 shots through 10 games. Continue to get the puck on net, Seth, because when he does and when he's aggressive at the blue line, that opens up a ton of other weapons for the Blackhawks and their man advantage. Pretty good start from Seth Jones. Had a few shaky games defensively, but for the most part, he's been a top 2 defenseman for the Blackhawks through their first 10. Teuvo Teravainen also has 7 points through 10 games, 3 goals and 4 assists. However, he has been held off of the stat sheet for in each of the last 5 games. So hopefully he'll be able to get it going when the Hawks take on the San Jose Sharks. Had a real good game the last time the Blackhawks faced San Jose. So hopefully he'll be able to pick up where he left off there and maybe get the Blackhawks top power play unit going as well, because he's got 2 goals on the man advantage. He also has a couple of sweet assists on the power play as well. It feels like when he's going with the extra man out there, the Blackhawks top unit is really going. Also, Ryan Donato, 6 points through the opening 8 games for him this season. Been healthy scratched a couple of times, but that hasn't stopped him from playing with a chip on his shoulder. Team leading 5 goals, also chipped in with an assist in the last game against the Colorado Avalanche to help the Blackhawks get a W. +3 rating for Ryan Donato through 8 games as well. Craig Smith also has only played 8 games, but has 5 points, 3 goals, and 2 assists, although he's only been in a fourth-line role. Has been finding ways to produce and has been doing a lot of good work along with Lukas Reichel. Alex Vlasic has played in each of the Blackhawks' first 10 games. Hasn't found the back of the net yet, but does have 5 assists for 5 points. Only 9 shots on goal, though. I would like to see Vlasic kind of have more of a desire to get pucks towards the net or just do a better job in that area. But aside from that, he's been absolutely outstanding, the most consistent defender for the Blackhawks so far. Jason Dickinson, through 10 games, 1 goal and 3 assists for 4 points. Had 2 assists in the win the other night against Colorado. Been a huge part of basically all the defensive success the Blackhawks have had as a team. A huge part of the penalty kill. Such a special defensive player that we're lucky to have centering our third line. Nick Foligno through 10 games, 3 goals and 1 assist for 4 points. Got off to a really hot start, but has kind of cooled off here as of late. Kind of the same thing with Teuvo Teravainen. Both of those guys real quiet on the top line with Bedard, and that led to Foligno being bumped down to the second line center spot. Quite honestly, though, at his age, I just don't really see a fit for him inside the Blackhawks top 6, but that's just my 2 cents personally. Lukas Reichel only played 6 games, was healthy scratched in the first 4 to kick things off, but has a goal and 3 assists for 4 points on the year. Even though he's been held to mostly a fourth-line role, he's been one of the better Blackhawks players. Taylor Hall has played in all 10 games, 2 goals and 1 assist for 3 points. Hasn't been all that consistent, but I will give him a little bit of slack since he is just returning off of a torn ACL that cost him the majority of last season. Pat Maroon, a free agent that was brought in this year, has played in 9 of the Hawks' first 10 games, no goals, 3 assists, but has been a difference maker down on the fourth line. I've liked what we've gotten out of Pat Maroon. Rookie Nolan Allen has played in 7 of the first 10 games, no goals, and 2 assists for him. There's been some ups, there's been some downs, as you would expect for a rookie, but I like what he's done with the opportunity for the most part. Kind of in a tough spot right now with the Hawks being without Alec Martinez, but I love his physical maturity. He's kind of having to learn on the fly right now, but he's doing a good job of it, in my opinion, for the most part. Tyler Bertuzzi, 10 games played, 2 goals, no assists for only 2 points. Will be featured among one of the biggest disappointments for the Blackhawks early on here in segment 2. Spoiler alert, TJ Brody has not been very good either. 10 games played, no goals, 2 assists for only 2 points, -6. Feels like he's a liability every time that he's on the ice. Philip Kurashev has played in 9 of the 10 games, was a healthy scratch, of course, against Vancouver. 2 goals, no assists for 2 points. Got to get him going a little bit more. Team worst, -7 rating. Joey Anderson's played 5 games with 1 assist. Someone who's probably going to be rotated in and out of the lineup throughout the course of the year. Wyatt Kaiser has played in 9 of the opening 10 games with 1 assist. Still looking for his first NHL goal. But I like his composure. He definitely has made strides from when we saw him early on last year. Ilya Mikheyev has played 10 games, finally got on the stat sheet for the first time with the last empty netter for the Blackhawks to seal it in Colorado. And then Andreas Athanasiou has only played in half of the Blackhawks opening 10 games, 5 GPs, 0 points for AA, leaving him in a real tough position moving forward as an outsider looking in for the Blackhawks in their forward group. As far as some team statistics that I wanted to go through, the Blackhawks are 14th in the NHL on the power play, clicking at a 21.2% rate. Second unit was actually the one to find the back of the net in that win against Colorado in their most recent game. I do think the Blackhawks have the capability of being somewhere between 10th and 16th in the NHL on the power play this year. We've seen it in blips. They just got to be a little bit more consistent. Penalty kill is 18th in the NHL as of right now. They've given up some goals here in their last chunk of games, 77.4%. But again, I do think that also is a unit that can be between 10th and 16th. I think the Blackhawks certainly can be better in the special teams department than they've been in the last handful of seasons. At the faceoff dot, they're 27th, winning 47.1% of their draws. This is an area they're bound to struggle at, considering Connor Bedard still has issues there and they don't have a true second line center. And then in terms of goals for per game, 25th in the NHL at 2.7 goals. Clearly still lacking that star power up front. 19th in the NHL in goals against per game, though, at 3.3. Tough that they've given up some or had some shoddy defensive performances over their past few contests, because I think they were 12th in the NHL before their last 2 home games during their 4-game homestand. But some decent team numbers there for the Blackhawks. It feels like, with what they've gotten on the special teams department, they could have 4 or 5 wins. They probably deserve to have 1 or 2 more wins than they do. But they got to get some better efforts from a handful of guys, mostly the offseason additions that GM Kyle Davidson has brought in. But there are the team and individual statistics that I wanted to run through real quick through the Blackhawks' first 10 games. Coming up in just a moment, I'll talk about the biggest standouts and the biggest disappointments for the Blackhawks. But first, I got to talk to you all real quick about Prize Picks. Prize Picks is America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. And Prize Picks is the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports, because all you got to do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. Do you think that Connor McDavid will get more than 0.5 goals in his next game? Or how about Austin Matthews to have more than 1.5 points? You can now cook up hot takes with your friends and win real money this hockey season when you and your crew run your game with Prize Picks. And one thing that I personally like about Prize Picks is it's the only real daily fantasy platform that also has an injury insurance policy, so that your lineups stay in play even when a player gets injured. So be sure to go and download the Prize Picks app today and use the code LOCKEDONNHL in all caps to get $50 off when you place $5 down. Again, that's code LOCKEDONNHL in all caps with Prize Picks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. Prize Picks, run your game. Back here on the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Just wanted to say thank you to everyone out there for making Locked On Blackhawks your very first listen. Now for your second listen, be sure to go and check out the Locked On Fantasy Hockey podcast. Go and become a fantasy hockey expert and get the edge over your league mates with daily tips from Steal and Flip. Go and find Locked On Fantasy Hockey right now on YouTube or wherever you may be listening to your podcasts. Segment 2, after going through the Blackhawks' individual player stats and a couple of team statistics in segment 1, it's time to go through the biggest standouts and disappointments through the opening 10 games. Starting with the standouts, the biggest standout, I think, to me, maybe he hasn't been the biggest impact player for the Blackhawks. Maybe he's not their most noteworthy performer. He's not their leading point getter. But I think Ryan Donato has to be the biggest standout because he's been healthy scratched twice, which, as I mentioned on the podcast, in my opinion, wasn't really deserved. I thought he had a good preseason, had shown enough in his first couple of games of the year to stay in the lineup, but I did understand taking him out for a game or two because there isn't anything long-term tied to Ryan Donato. He's not a future puzzle piece here of the Blackhawks rebuild, but good on him for, every time he gets scratched, jumping right back in the lineup and playing with an edge, playing with that chip on his shoulder, as I mentioned, making a difference on a nightly basis. Huge impact that he had in that big-time road win for the Blackhawks in Colorado. He's now got a team-high 5 goals through 8 games this year, 6 points through 8 games, despite being in a bottom 6 role without getting any power play time. Good on Ryan Donato. I love the grit that he's shown so far here early on in the year. Second standout, I think it has to be Connor Bedard, and I know some people would probably dispute with me that Bedard has been a standout for the Blackhawks thus far, but listen, he's still the player who's getting the most scoring chances on this team. he's still clearly the most talented player on this offense. He's their leading scorer, 9 points, 3 goals, and 6 assists. I mentioned why there's still room for him to grow and to believe that the dam is going to be breaking here soon. And it feels like he's already kind of kicked that down a little bit with what we've seen in his last few games. He is the player at 19 years old that opposing teams, opposing coaching staffs are having circled on the board every time they're playing the Blackhawks. The opposing team's best defensive trio is mostly playing Connor Bedard on a nightly basis, and he's still finding ways to produce. He's still finding ways to get scoring chances. Yes, you'd like to see him maybe finish some more of those looks and be more productive on the power play. But again, he's only 19, and he's still doing this well without a ton of help alongside him. I have no concerns about Connor Bedard whatsoever. I think anyone having concerns about Connor Bedard is absolutely foolish. And the people who are saying he's frustrated and going to ask for a trade, he's been here for basically only one season. What, did he think they were going to be contenders immediately? Connor Bedard's not stupid. He didn't think he was going to a situation where the Blackhawks were going to turn it around immediately. He knows this is a long-term rebuild. So let's pump the brakes with any concerns about Bedard. He's still the head honcho and the most talented player for this Blackhawks offense. The chances have been there on a nightly basis, and I firmly believe the finished product and the finishing ability, we're going to see more and more of that here really, really soon out of number 98. Another standout for the Blackhawks, Alex Vlasic. So far through the first 10 games, he's proven last year was absolutely no fluke. He is the most capable and the best in-zone defender that the Blackhawks have already at his age, playing over 20 minutes a night, and he's growing his offensive game right in front of our eyes. The puck-moving ability, the play in the offensive zone. I mean, Vlasic has made some really heads-up passes and has picked up some nice primary assists through these first 10 games. I will say I don't like him on the top power play unit. I think you have to have Seth Jones there until Kevin Korchinski is ready for that role. But I do like getting Alex Vlasic time on the second power play because, A, there's really no one that's more capable than he is. You could argue Wyatt Kaiser, but there's probably not much of a difference there. And also it allows Vlasic to continue to grow his offensive game and get more confidence in those situations. Even he mentioned a couple of nights ago when he looked pretty lackluster on the man advantage that he did a real bad job out there. But at his age, it's about developing him for the long term, and putting him in those situations where he might be uncomfortable now is going to bode so well for him in the long term. I've been thrilled with Alex Vlasic, one of the best players for the Blackhawks, undoubtedly, through their opening 10 games. Lucas Reichel, too, I think has been a standout. I know he's only played 6 games. It's a very small sample size. But despite being handled poorly, in my opinion, despite being put down on the fourth line with Pat Maroon and Craig Smith, he's been absolutely buzzing and has been one of the more impactful players for the Blackhawks. And that's led to Luke Richardson having no choice but to keep him in the lineup, give him a larger role on some nights, get him some looks with the power play. I wish he would have played better with Connor Bedard. And interesting to note, Rinkside General, who makes phenomenal YouTube content for the Blackhawks, also has a great account on X, mentioned that he thinks that Bedard and Reichel's styles just don't match well with one another. That's something that I never really thought about, and maybe something I should focus more on when they're on the ice out there together. So that led to Reichel going back to the fourth line, and the Hawks win over Colorado. However, wherever he's been productive. We've seen the ability to play in transition, the heads-up reads, the heads-up passes. Lucky break to get his first goal of the season, but he's finding ways to end up on the stat sheet, and that's what matters. Love to see Lucas Reichel taking advantage of these opportunities. I think he has to be one of the standouts, even though he's only played in 6 games. As far as the biggest disappointments, I think number 1 and number 2 are pretty clear-cut for the Blackhawks. Number 1, to me, has been Tyler Bertuzzi. The fact that he has no 5-on-5 points, both of his goals have come on the power play, and quite honestly, both have been handed to him a little bit as a result of just phenomenal passes. Doesn't have an assist yet on the year. The defense has been lackluster. Honestly, the skating ability, I think, has been really lackluster. The physicality hasn't really been there. The second line has been a ghost for the Blackhawks, and that's killing them right now. Like, it has been a frustrating start to Tyler Bertuzzi's tenure here in Chicago, and to think we have him signed on for 3 more years after this one at the price tag what we paid him, yeah, it's definitely concerning. However, only 10 games, seen Blackhawks players get off to slow starts, and sometimes it takes a little bit to establish that chemistry, but hard not to be concerned about Tyler Bertuzzi right now, and hard not to be concerned about TJ Brodie, 2 TBs that are letting the Blackhawks down right now. Been the worst defender for the Blackhawks is Brodie basically on a nightly basis. It feels like every time he steps foot on the ice, he's a liability in the defensive zone, losing puck battles, losing foot races, getting beat along the boards, outbodied in front of the net. It has been very concerning. And like Tyler Bertuzzi, considering the deal that he signed, he has 1 more year here with the Blackhawks. It's like, oh my God, we're really going to have to deal with this guy for another 16 months. TJ Brodie, as a veteran, just absolutely needs to be better, and I'm sure he's probably well aware that his play has been very lackluster here thus far. Undoubtedly, the 2 biggest disappointments for the Blackhawks, and it sucks when they were 2 of the free agent ads that GM Kyle Davidson brought in. I also think Philip Kurashev deserves a little bit of flack, but not as much as the first 2, because although he only has 2 goals and no assists through 9 games this year, he's not a center, and he's having to play the second-line center position. And with Luke Richardson as your head coach, you have a lot of defensive responsibilities as a center. It's why he absolutely loves Jason Dickinson, right? Jason Dickinson is probably Luke Richardson's favorite player on the team. As a longtime shutdown defensive defenseman himself, that's the style that he likes. That's the style that he played. And Philip Kurashev, like Lucas Reichel, just doesn't play that style. So he's put in a little bit of a tough spot right now. He's not playing a style that fits him. He's not in a position that's true to what he is. Finally got bumped up with Connor Bedard for the first time this year after having a lot of success with him in the last game. We'll see how Richardson is going to go about these forward combinations, but whether he is on the second line or the first line, we need Philip Kurashev doing more. Had to feel good for him to get his second goal of the year in the last game. The hope is that he'll be able to build off of that moving forward. I would say Taylor Hall has been a little bit of a disappointment as well, right? But as I mentioned in segment 1, he's coming off of that torn ACL, missed the majority of last year. It's been a while since he's played in game action and been up to game speed, so I'm going to give him a little bit of slack. But Bertuzzi, Brodie, and Kurashev are the 3 biggest disappointments to me for the Blackhawks through their opening 10 games, while Ryan Donato, Connor Bedard, Alex Vlasic, and Lucas Reichel have been the biggest standouts. Probably got to give a little bit of a shout out to Craig Smith as well for having 5 points through his opening 8 games, but Ryan Donato's taken a little bit of his shine after having a 3-point outing in that win over Colorado. But there are all the numbers that I wanted to talk about on today's show through the Blackhawks opening 10 games of the 24-25 NHL regular season. Not done yet on today's show, Blackhawks fans. Coming up in just a moment, I still have to talk about potential trade targets for the Hawks as GM Kyle Davidson is reportedly kicking the tires around the league. But first, I got to talk to you all real quick about the fine folks over at FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with America's #1 sportsbook, which is FanDuel. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and will get $150 worth of bonus bets if that first $5 bet wins. And the FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything that you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So that when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can easily check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you also happen to place your bets. And FanDuel has all of you hockey fans covered this season as well. How about our Blackhawks' big-time victory over the Avs in their last outing? Can they keep that momentum going against the Sharks on Halloween night manana? If you want to go and put a wager down on the Blackhawks, be sure to go and visit FanDuel.com. And if you're not already a member, sign up, create an account. And if your first $5 bet wins, FanDuel will award you with $150 worth of bonus bets. Again, that's FanDuel.com to get $150 worth of bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. So never waste a hunch and go and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the National Football League. Segment 3, the Blackhawks have reportedly been involved in trade talks already here early on in the season. A couple of weeks ago, probably about 10 days ago now, I believe it was, Elliot Friedman, David Pagnotta of the fourth period reported that general manager Kyle Davidson was kicking the tires on a potential second-line center to bring in, as Frank Nazar was unable to make the Blackhawks team out of training camp, and it really, to me at least, seems like the Blackhawks kind of put all their eggs in that basket, considering Teuvo Teravainen, Tyler Bertuzzi were the two top 6 additions that they made in free agency, neither of them of which being a center, of course. So that kind of tells me they were thinking Frank Nazar was going to make the team. He didn't, and that's left the Blackhawks with a little bit of a glaring hole in their forward group here early on in the year. So not that surprising to see that general manager Kyle Davidson is asking around to see if he can fill that gap. However, I brought this up on the show when the news first broke, but I did want to dive into it a little bit more thoroughly here on today's episode. There's a lot of difficulties between the Blackhawks finding an answer for their second line deficiency right now because A, they need to find a team who's also willing to make a trade 10 games into the season, which is complicated in and alone of itself. B, they got to do something that fits their timeline because they have a lot of center depth. They've used a lot of decent high round draft picks on centers, right? Frank Nazar obviously has the potential to be a center. Maybe he's going to be a wing, but we still really don't know. The jury's out on that. Oliver Moore plays the center position primarily at Minnesota. We've seen him play wing from time to time, but because of his speed, you probably want him playing center. Ryan Green also has the ability to play center. That's where he's been all 3 years for BU. Dominic James has played center for Minnesota, Duluth, and the United States. And when he did play at the World Juniors, he was one of the better face-off men there. AJ Spellacy, because of his speed and size, has the ability to play the center position as well. Like, there's a lot of center depth already in the Blackhawks organization, players who this front office have high hopes for. And I don't think they want to go and clog that up. They don't want to prevent Frank Nazar from stepping into that spot, whether it's, in the next couple of weeks or next season, and the same to be said for Oliver Moore. So they kind of need to find someone who's a plug-in option for them for at the maximum 2 years, maybe 1 year. And also the team that the Blackhawks want to be doing a trade with, the Blackhawks have to have something that's going to make them want to do a deal. And that's probably the toughest part of it all, because if you look at this Blackhawks organizational assets outside of, draft picks and prospects, there's not really a ton that teams want. And teams that are making trades early on here in the year are either probably teams that are trying to make a run for the Stanley Cup and need to fill a gap that is already noticeable, or they're teams that aren't going anywhere and you need to give them a piece that's going to make this trade worth it. So there's a lot of complications that go into filling this second line center deficiency problem that the Blackhawks have on their hands. However, I did want to go over probably the 2 to 3 names that have been mentioned around the most. The first being Trevor Zegras, of course, of the Anaheim Ducks, former high first-round selection for them back in 2019. Got off to a roaring start to his NHL career, but there's been a lot of turbulence for him in Anaheim these last couple of seasons. First, he only has 2 points through the opening 9 games of the year this season, only had 15 points in 31 games last year when he was riddled with injuries and was never consistent even when he was on the ice. And the kid's already 23 years old. He's going to be turning 24 in March, which by no means is old, but for him to be the type of prospect and player that you thought was possible with the ceiling that he had at a young age, the clock is starting to tick there a little bit. And with him having 2 years left at $5.75 million, first off, the Anaheim Ducks are probably wondering, what are we going to do with this guy? And other teams are probably wondering if anyone, I'm sure there are teams with interest, by the way. The Blackhawks reportedly have been one of them. I'm sure teams are wondering what Anaheim is willing to take in order to move on from Trevor Zegras and give him another opportunity with another team. However, there are worries there about Trevor Zegras for me. I do think he makes sense because of his short-term contract, right? Like if the Ducks are willing to sell low on him, which again, I don't know if they'd be willing to do, it all depends on the mindset of their organization. I think he could be a decent fit for the short term for the Blackhawks, and there's a lot of upside there, right? There's the belief that he can still be a special player. It's just whether or not he'll be able to find it. I just think he's not necessarily the player type that the Blackhawks need to bring in. Is he more skill inside this top six right here, right now? Undoubtedly, but kind of feels like Frank Nazar could be really similar to Trevor Zegras. Frank Nazar, much more unproven than Trevor Zegras, but Zegras is undersized, plays with pace, an outside style game, not a big body, right? Like, that's kind of my concerns, but Trevor Zegras undoubtedly would be a big addition in terms of skill for this Blackhawks top six. He is the one that undoubtedly makes the most sense, but still a lot of complications, and $5.75 million, even though the Blackhawks can afford it, it's not something to just bat an eye at. Dylan Cousins is another prospect that's been kind of thrown around recently. To me, it feels like too big of a price tag. He's got $7.1 million per year until 2027, 2028. Although he is a kid I really liked when he was in his draft year, ended up getting selected by Buffalo, had a really good 2022-23 campaign, 68 points that year, but only had 47 in 79 games last year. And through the opening 10 this season, no goals and 3 assists. But after Buffalo traded Casey Middlestad, there's like a lack of center depth there. I honestly don't think Buffalo would be trying to trade Dylan Cousins unless they got a wow offer from someone, and I don't think the Blackhawks are the team to provide that. So don't see Dylan Cousins happening. Shane Pinto, I think, is an interesting name, although he did just sign a 2-year extension with Ottawa in the offseason, but it feels like that relationship has been disgruntled ever since he's been there. Pinto definitely isn't as proven as Trevor Zegras is, though. His career high is 35 points in 82 games, and that was 2 years ago. Last year, he did have 27 points in 41 games, so good point per game, but we just haven't seen a large enough sample size, I think, to feel confident that Shane Pinto would be a solution to the Blackhawks' top six right here, right now. And again, after just getting a contract extension, I don't know if Ottawa would be willing to move on from him. Cole Sillinger is another interesting name, but again, I don't see Columbus wanting to trade him. They probably think he's a big focal point, even though he was probably rushed to the NHL and his first few years haven't necessarily been ideal, but he's gotten off to a good start this season, 7 points through the opening 8 games. 2 years left at $2.25 million. Again, it feels like a situation where Columbus would probably have to be wowed in order to move on from him, and it just doesn't feel like the Blackhawks are in a situation to make that type of trade in order to solve a problem for this type of season where, again, they're really not going anywhere. So there are my thoughts on the Blackhawks. Potential trade targets. Feels like it's going to be an outside chance that they make a trade to solve this second-line center issue. To me, the more than likely option is that Frank Nazar is probably called up just a little bit sooner than anyone expected. But that's going to take care of today's episode of Locked On Blackhawks. Thank you all again for joining me on the show. Be sure to go and follow Locked On Blackhawks for free right now, wherever you may be listening to your podcasts, and to go and subscribe to Locked On Blackhawks on YouTube.